Hello and welcome. This is an exciting recording because it's Cyber Monday. So,
Oh,
what better way to come together with one of my favorite people on the planet here, Reuben Bell, longtime friend and former colleague who is a 25-year vet from J&J Consumer, U.S. Kenvue business, but also is the founder and owner of Catapult Group. So now helping a variety of brands really get off the ground, has background and experience in every single functional area you could possibly imagine, from commercial side of the house or marketing, supply chain. And as folks who are part of our community now know, that our mission is to just share stories of things that can happen in online marketplaces and how we can help continue to just share anecdotes, tips, tricks for anyone out there who is motivated to help build healthy brands. So,
oh,
welcome, Ruben. I'm excited for
thank
today.
you. Thank you for having me, Jen. I appreciate it. This is exciting. You mentioned that 25 years, and I'm like, yes, I have the war scars. 25 years of selling and supply chain and moving widgets from point A to point B. But I'm happy to be here. This is exciting.
Wonderful. And I know you've worked across so many different brands, and I can relate, coming also from the world of legacy J&J Consumer. One of the things that I know you've seen across a variety of brands and wearing, sales, trade marketing, sales strategy, just supply chain hats. Maybe we can just kick off with your experience in brands building healthy growth.
Yeah.
And when you think of healthy growth and the strategies that you've seen, large conglomerates and brands apply, and where there's still loopholes
Yeah.
to be
Yeah.
aware of. I know you have many, many experiences down this arena.
Yeah, I think that question can take us all day. I would say it depends on what hat you're wearing. Supply chain might look at it differently, marketing may look at it differently, sales may look at it differently. But I think if you're looking at it as a unit, it all comes back to a couple of things for me: the fundamentals, and more importantly, what's the consumer aspiration, right? What are you trying to do with the consumer? Do you have a consumer, what we call a North Star? And if you're focused on that North Star, all of your decisions should come back to that. At Johnson& Johnson, we had the Credo, and we try to balance all of our decisions against the Credo. I would say the same thing here with a consumer brand. It has to come back to that consumer promise and what you're trying to deliver to that consumer, and let that guide your decisions while you're trying to grow and scale the brand.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And, the balancing of how to achieve that North Star and the path to get there. Can you share a little bit about, the role of partnerships and how those partnerships can play in protecting or not protecting the brand? And I know partnerships come in a variety of ways. It's internal teams with customers, with partners in the distribution network, all of the above in living into the ambition for the end consumer, but where things might get a little bit squirrely and where you've seen disruption sort of
Yeah.
happen in the online world.
Yeah, like a lot of the disruption happens when you've not did a great job of knowing your partner, right? Those folks who are in long-term relationships can appreciate that, right? You've made it in a long-term relationship because you've gotten a chance to know who your partner is, what things make it work, what their mission and motives are, and you sort of align on those things that allow you guys to have harmony moving forward, right? And so sometimes we jump into partnerships and don't really process the long-term effect of those partnerships, right? And so like I think partnerships is really what allows brands to really grow. I call it the shock absorber, right? You're not going at it alone. You're not trying to be a one-trick pony, but those partnerships help you really understand how we can leverage our strengths together so that we can again meet that consumer promise, right? I think about smaller brands out here. It's important to find the right partners as early as possible, right? There's a lot of trial and error, but if you can find a lot of the right partners, it helps you when you think about scaling. I think of businesses like the Emerson Group as an example that bring a lot of great skill sets, a lot of great people to the table, certainly with a great asset for your brand, with a strong consumer promise. Those kind of things really set you up for success because you have partners that have sort of seen it all, and they can help you navigate those turbulent waters, even as the environment continues to change, right? CPG continues to change over and over and over again. Retail continues to change over and over again. But having those trusted partners is really what can set you apart as you're trying to really take your brand from 0 to 60 over time.
And I couldn't agree more, especially with partners that have the capabilities to be able to do the breadth for a variety of brands. Share with me and, any particular instances that come to mind. Brands may or may not be named. We know how sensitive that, but if you feel the need to share, or maybe category, maybe back at your time at J&J when you have scale. So let's fast forward. We're living in, the world of brands. I mean, we worked on several brands that were huge: Listerine, Tena, Band-Aid, so many huge beauty brands, Neutrogena, that all have large distribution, huge scale, promotional and pricing strategies that are these like nuggets that have levers across the board, and managing a very, very complex ecosystem, particularly with customers, clients. And then how does that play out? I know things like map strategies, map enforcement. What's been some of your learnings that you can share with our
Yeah,
community
yeah. I'll
members?
try not to let my pain show as I talk about these examples, right? Some of those flashbacks are nightmares, right? And I think if you go back, you use the example of our time with J&J. If you go back to some of those examples, we had a different challenge, right? We had very established businesses, and oh, by the way, here comes the e-commerce channel really growing, where now technology plays a significant part in how your brands show up. And so you're trying to launch and scale your business in e-commerce on Amazon, and particularly pretty quickly. So you're throwing your entire catalog out there. But there's usually some things that we've gotten away with over time: promotion, pricing strategies that haven't totally been vetted, or at least you thought they were vetted, right? That start to create challenges. And now here you have this behemoth that can change price, arguably every 15 or 20 minutes. And so, there were times where we had promotional strategies not being cohesive as sales channels, where you're doing the weekly discount in your food channels, you're doing a rollback in Walmart, and you have a lot of folks now who claim to be price followers, right, and have the ability to really change price. Like, I think the important thing is take a step back and say, what are you trying to achieve? Validate who your consumer is, validate where your consumer shops, and let that be, again, that North Pole that helps you decide how you set up a pricing strategy that can set you up for success. A map policy is important, but it has to be really strategic. You may remember we had map policies that really, when you dive into that thing deeply, allow channels to promote products. And now what was meant to be only 4 times a year, now it's 12 weeks in a quarter, because everyone's taking their turn to do it, which does what, right? It resets your price in the marketplace, which means now there's a profit war, which means now there's a lot of customers mad at you. And you have to go have some very challenging conversations. So again, it goes back to the fundamentals, thinking about what am I trying to achieve with my pricing strategy? Who is my consumer? What does she like? What does she shop? What mission is she on when she's shopping? To really think about it strategically, how you set your price. Is that price set to the proper value? If it's set to the proper value, do you really need to be discounting your product every week, right? And I know that's pressure that comes from retail channels because they want to provide additional value to their consumers. You got to figure out how you want to hold the line and what you want to be. It's hard to be all things to all people. I know sometimes in retail we try to balance that, but it's really hard to do, right? It comes back to knowing who you are, but more importantly, knowing who your consumer is, how she shops, and how do you want to reach her? And how do you want to provide her value above what your brand is already standing for in the marketplace? And I think if you do that, it'll help you. A lot of brands try to grow too fast, and they say yes, they don't know how to say no. They say yes to Sephora, yes to Ulta, yes to Walmart, yes to Amazon, yes to Target. And next thing you know, you have a lot of these partners that we know create a lot of those challenges for you in the marketplace, and you struggle with how to manage that. We have to remember, Jen, a lot of the brands that are launching these days are great brands, but the founders aren't necessarily from the CPG worlds that we grew up in. So these things are sort of blind spots for them. They don't know how to navigate these things, but there's some rules that are important to ensure that you set yourself up for the best case of success, so that you can scale properly with less headaches, if you will.
Yeah. I remember distinctly being in a situation.
Yes.
Amazon was still an immature, small relative to the bigger, client base, customer base. And I remember having to make very, very tough trade offs. Uh, you have the fast growing, fast moving, real time data. You can see the momentum, you can see conversion,
Yes.
you can see traffic, but you have a legacy tried and true that can't be challenged or
Yes.
difficult to challenge. And
Difficult.
so I agree. I think first measuring and knowing the balance of what are the trade offs and impacts that you make, but being okay to make the trade offs. I think at
Get
the
okay with
time it
that.
was so painful because
Yeah.
this is my world. But to your point, if taking a step back and looking at the whole, like
Yes.
by everyone holding on to their own individual, is it achieving the bigger
The bigger
ambition? And
result.
oftentimes
Yeah.
it wasn't.
Yeah.
And so needing to make those trade offs, I think, is a big kind of element as a build on to what you're
Yeah.
saying too.
Well, to your point, right? I remember, right? I think I lost a couple of years of my life, right, fighting for unique assortment because we know unique assortment sort of shakes the algorithm a little bit and tries to avoid some of that price matching, which exposes your brand to such bigger challenges, right? And that's a hard thing to get brands to get behind for all of the obvious reasons, especially when you look forward to having those pipe shipments that really help you set your brand up for success with some infused capital to now drive marketing and drive your P&L. But that's why we talk about those things, right? Unique assortment, right? Or offering assortment that's exclusive or limited in the retail channels that gives you a chance to fight that good fight and get that flywheel going and getting consumers in the channel that are looking for that sort of shop. Now Amazon is everything to everybody, right? I just saw an article, they're selling cars on Amazon, and so we have a long way to go because I would imagine this retail CPG world is going to continue to evolve faster than we ever thought it would.
Absolutely. And you're in such a fun seat now in working and advising, connecting with a variety of brands of all sizes, but in maybe thinking about some of more of the emerging brands that are just getting off the ground, as you mentioned, just starting to build this momentum, or maybe a brand that is part of a large organization, but also still just trying to get off the ground. What advice can you give in lessons learned if you had to start with the fundamentals? Like, here are the two or three things you would consider non-negotiables. Like, it might be hard, it'll feel restricting, or it'll feel like it's going to slow you down, but they're worth it in the long run. Like, what
Yeah.
would some of those kind of principles
Yeah.
be?
I'll throw some things out the top of my head that come to mind, right? But the first thing that comes to mind for me is avoid the temptation, right? There's a lot of temptation when you have a new brand and you have this idea of what you want your baby to become, right? You have a tendency to say yes to everything, right? I'm selling my product in the flea market. I'm selling my product, right? At the garage sale. I'm selling my product on D2C. I'm on Amazon. I just had two retailers, Sprouts, right? And another retailer say yes, right? Now all of a sudden you've had what appears to be some success without taking a step back and really looking at strategically, how does that help or hurt your brand, right? And so I would tell you, resist the temptation and focus on what we all learn in business school, right? Those 4 Ps, right? Do I have a product that has a unique selling proposition or a market dominating position? Does it meet a need, right? Do I have a pricing strategy that makes a lot of sense when I'm trying to launch this in a crowded, competitive world, especially for a brand like a beauty brand, right? If you're launching a lipstick or a concealer or another facial cream or an acne product, very heavy, war ravaged categories, right? You really want to make sure you have a product that has a unique selling proposition. And more importantly, you can show up in a way that's really successful, right? Naming is important, right? There's a lot of people that come up with creative names, right? But what happens when you're fighting the food category for search when you're in a beauty category, right? Because you picked the name that's competing with Sara Lee, right? Or you pick the name that's competing with big food brands, right? So there's some fundamentals, right? Does my product have the unique selling proposition? Do I have a pricing strategy that makes sense? That as I build a community out there and people start looking for my product because I've demonstrated authenticity, does my price make sense to what's in the marketplace? And if you can get the product right, if you can get the pricing right, and if you can avoid temptation, I think you put yourself in a position to really crawl, walk, and run your brand to success, right? With the proper support and help. The things that people don't talk a lot about, and I'll leave you with this, right? Got to get the supply chain right. Supply chain never got a time in the limelight. Now it's time to be the shining star, right? The Hollywood star on the Walk of Fame. If you don't have availability, it's not going to win, right? I see some brands through their trial and error, they hit a home run and they have their viral moment. And what happens? No inventory. So now they have to start that viral moment all over again because the system has to start all over again, right? So you have to predict lead time. You have to project lead time. It's super important. It's just as important as how your brand shows up, because if you don't have product, you don't have a brand, right? You have a hobby. And so I think that's what I would leave you with. Supply chain. Do you have a unique product? Resist temptation. And is your pricing commensurate with the value that it provides in a crowded marketplace?
Maybe I'll build one additional thread while I have you in seat wearing supply chain hat as well, because I also have learned to really appreciate, now sitting sort of on the side that I'm in today's world, this balancing act of not enough inventory to what you described in meeting demand, but almost at times when you have too much and you
Absolutely.
have this dynamic of channels, secret backdoor liquidations to clear out inventory to make room for net new. And then you have almost too much out there that is represented not only by you, but many others.
Yeah.
Other resellers, other sites, or that might not be conveying what you so desire. And this idea of like control, but it's so tricky. This
Yeah.
juggling and balancing act of like just the right inventory at the right time across whatever channel signals that you can get. Um, what maybe one nuanced advice for those brands who might be on the side of, okay, it's almost feels a little bit like the wild, wild west out there that I want to try to get back a little more control with the same, the same principles of what you just shared and getting back to the
Yeah.
center. I know definitely still stand true, but are there any last one in there that you'd sneak in,
Yeah.
considering there's so many also that just have a lot?
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. I think it's hard now to not have a conversation, not have a podcast, not have a discussion, and not talk about data and AI. Right? This is when you have to really have a good handle on understanding what you're selling to and who you're selling to. Right? When we talk about those partners and relationships, had an instance similar to that where I won't say the retailer's name, but a brand was excited because they were selling to this retailer, but they were offering a too good to be true discount because of the value that they got from the media coverage that this retailer brand had. Something happened, wind up having excess inventory. We finally get on Amazon through our partners in the broker space. And now we're competing against ourselves because product has showed up with a seller that we never sold to, right? And because we were able to trace the product, we know exactly where it came from. It came from that retailer partner, right? And so this is where it's important to understand who your partners are, understanding what are the consequences of giving too much of a discount in exchange for top line sales, because there are consequences, right? Other people selling your product, they're not going to represent your product the way you would. They're not going to communicate to the consumers the way you are. And guess who takes the rap if that product doesn't show up the proper way, or if that product leaves a bad experience because something happened out of your control? So control is important. Be very clear about who you're selling to, where your product is going, so that you can protect it in a way that sets you up for long-term success. But yeah, it's a challenge. It is a wild, wild west. There are seemingly resellers everywhere, and everyone's willing to sell anything to anybody because it's a sales opportunity. Some of us in large companies have margin hurdles. Some of these companies have no margin hurdle. If I make a penny, if I make a nickel, if I make a dime or a dollar, it's worth it. So let me continue to move product, right? But that's just not a safe thing, right? And so you have to be smart about who you're selling to. Again, back to that earlier question, know your partners, know so that you set yourself up for long-term success. Back to those fundamentals, back to the partners, and resist the temptation of saying yes to everyone that knocks on your door or everyone that says yes to you. You want to make sure it marries up to your long-term North Star.
Well, I am glad that you did not use your own principle in saying yes to join me on the podcast. That I am very
It's impossible, Jen, to say
always
no
just
to
on
you.
the caveat. When I asked you, like, please, please, please just say yes, Jen. I'm back. I'll be back. No worries.
I always say yes to you, Jen, but that's
Oh.
that's that partnership, that's that relationship, right? There's trust there. No, but this is
Oh, you're the
great.
best, Reuben. You're the best. And thank you. This has been wonderful. And I'm so glad I get to pick your brain here. You're giving me flashbacks to and just reminders of the fundamentals can go so far at
So
any
far.
stage, whether
Any
you're
stage.
emerging new brand getting off the ground.
Scaled. You're on the other side of 50 years out there. Those fundamentals,
Yeah.
right? They never leave you.
Yeah. And being
Yeah.
okay to say no. Being
Yes.
okay to say no is,
Yes,
yeah, those are
absolutely.
my takeaways for today. Thank you so much. And I really appreciate you chatting with us today.
Thank you so much, Jen. This was fun. I appreciate it.
All right. Thank you.
Take care.